Well, this is another part of the, and so this is involving some situations you got into with individuals while you were at AB Tech.
Yeah, I was there as a teacher from 2005 to 2012, part-time.
Well, I know you've got at least 30 pages or more of
Oh yeah.
these situations and impressions that were affecting you. So, but let's just narrow it down to three or four
Yeah.
major things that you felt had the strongest tie to your.
Okay. Will do. The first one would be Eli Wengard. And he was in a class in 2005. It was the third class that I had taught at AB Tech. The second class was sort of, the first one, teacher died, or didn't die, he almost died and couldn't come to class, and so they hired me. Second class was a surprise move, nobody knew it was going to happen until the last moment. And then the third class was, they had some warning and knew what I'd be, so it was sort of expecting somebody. Now maybe that's more than you wanted to hear, but whatever. Eli Wengard was in that class. That was in the fall of '05, and well, the first thing that I noticed about him was this strange comment about, he asked a question about what would happen to this baby. There was this picture in the book we were having about people getting shocked, and it was about electrical safety. And what would happen to that baby? And it showed these waves of electrical energy or something going through the water. And I thought, gosh, that's a strange question. Does he really want me to waste my time on that? And by the end of the semester, he was making comments like that all the time.
So the situation where there's a baby in some water.
Yeah, there's a picture.
And you could see the waves in the water?
Well, it was electrical equipotential lines, if you
Right.
want to be technically correct.
Well,
and,
yes.
and it's like, of course, you throw a baby into an electrified pool, they're in trouble.
Yeah.
It's not necessarily going to be a good thing for
And
them.
so he's just wondering how this.
What can he get a response?
Oh, okay.
But what kind of response is he going to get? Here's another irritating thing was he just kept his eyes glued on me all the time, watching me like a hawk, and yet from all the attention he was paying to everything I said and did, you'd think he'd get good grades, but they really weren't that good, and he didn't get an A. I'm sorry to say, because I don't mind giving these guys A's. It's just like, please don't come back to this classroom. His grades in the course were not at all exceptional, though, so that was odd. He also said he was a rock and roll musician, and so that's why he wanted to learn about electrical wiring. I didn't make the connection, because obviously all you need to do is you turn up the volume as high as you want, you make all the noise you can, and good music occasionally, and sing as loud as you want. And if the breaker trips, you just go find the panel and you switch it back on and you turn it down a little bit, Anyway, one comment that he made really stuck in my mind, and that was, he said that phrase that is not a common phrase, and yet I sort of learned about it when I was a child, I guess, but never talked about it much. It was the same as what Eric Nadel said in Mayor Babaland, south of Ahmednagar in India, canary in a coal mine. He was referring to me as being a canary in a coal mine. So here's this Eli Wengard, with no context to what's going on in the classroom at all, saying, says the words, canary in a coal mine. Does that mean anything to you? Sort of had this smile, expectant smile. And I just sort of looked at him like, geez, like I sort of had you pegged as potentially being a troublemaker of a certain line.
But now you've gone into a little bit higher level.
A little higher level.
Yes.
Because that was since the time I heard it in India, that was the first time I had heard it. 10 years had passed at least. And so that sort of sealed
That plus the
my
comment,
belief.
after he said that, the extra comment, does that mean anything to you?
Yeah, yeah. He
Yeah.
was soliciting a response, and I didn't give
You
him the
know.
pleasure of giving any. And because you just have to roll on in the classroom, you let these
But
guys
that's,
take over.
put a
and-
flag in your mind,
Yeah,
a flag.
a flag,
off
more
the-
than a flag.
Red flag.
Yeah, I mean, along with Peter Nordine's comments that there'd be
Yeah,
150, and by a time several years had passed, and this was way past several years, there might be 600 or more who would do whatever they felt comfortable with in furthering the cause of major boo-boo. And that's what I gotta call it when they use the techniques they used. It's a major boo-boo. No, it's not a Meher Baba, it's not a, which means to them, compassionate father. And I just didn't feel that way at all. So, okay, that's that, and, yeah.
Sue was our next guy on the list.
Yeah.
Made the list.
Well, along with Eli Wingard, there was a guy named Andrew Walgate in that class. And I don't want to spend a lot of time on him, but it's a technique that he used. And the fact that he was very close friends with I don't know about very close, they seemed to be good friends. They
Right.
talked with one another. And so, and they would sometimes sit together towards the end of the semester in the front row, right where I was at and whatever. He would formulate questions that seemed legitimate, interrupt my response in a seemingly innocent way, and insist he was right. So it's like he just sort of doesn't complete the question, and then he makes up the question he really thought he had asked, but he really didn't ask. If you looked at the words, it was just a nuisance type thing, and he always wanted to be right. And fortunately, he didn't know that much natively about electrical wiring. And I felt in a position of knowledge or whatever, and that made me feel better that this guy, you know, because I had to spend some time on matters technical. I didn't have to spend much time on the baby thrown in the swimming pool, right? But if he asked a legitimate technical question, but the way he had of being combative about it was passive-aggressive in the way that many in the group were, and he was good friends with this guy who had that direct connection, and that there were other connections. And there's just certain kinds of people seem to coalesce together.
So that's how he made the list.
That's how he made the
That
list.
kind of conduct.
Yeah. And let's see. He had the same, basically, I don't want to talk about that.
Who's our next?
Who's our next?
Yeah.
Okay, Kevin Powell would be the one. The first time he was in a course, he only attended part of the first two classes. He walked out in the middle. And he went through most of the time he spent there with his head resting on his hands like this, you know. Like either he was trying to control himself from lashing out, or he was terribly bored, or he was very, you know, on some medication or something. I don't know. But I didn't have any evidence of medication later on, so he just was a very unique and different kind of person. He left after about an hour of the second class, complaining about the quality of teaching at AB Tech. And he showed up later in my classes too, and well, he just had to get used to it. I was only doing what I could do to present the material. He reminded me his techniques, because he honed these techniques to a fine edge later on. He would be sitting this way in class, usually on the front row off to my right in the field of vision, and he would be sitting like this. All of a sudden he'd blurt out, "And what does that have to do with the," you know, he'd just go on with some question and talk all of a sudden real loud. It got to a certain point in the class would laugh at him, you know, and whenever that happened. But a very unique style that I could live with, but it was pretty difficult to ignore. I mean, he definitely drew attention to himself in a certain way. I saw a great similarity between that kind of behavior and the Alan Wagner's behavior in India. Alan would often test the waters with some sort of a loud voice or whatever, you know. So, yeah. Let me go on, and I think I have some more about him. Kevin Powell, yes. In the last weeks of a certain class, Kevin Powell informed me, complete with a smile and a bit of an edge to it, that he was going to be in the summer class. And I said as long as he behaved, he was okay. I wasn't going to flunk him just because somebody else had dropped out of the class. I wasn't going to focus on him. He was behaving decently. And then he informed me that he was going to be in that some summer class. When it was announced the summer session class was canceled, he got very angry. And
Was that from a lack of?
lack of attendance or need. If people needed to graduate or needed the class to graduate, then they would have a class. If they
Right.
didn't need it to graduate, then they wouldn't have a
It's
class.
very flexible.
That's very flexible.
Yeah.
And, you know, so that made me sort of have many hours some years and not as many the next year. It might be the end of Kevin Powell. Oh, my. You know who's next?
No, who's next?
Larry Funk.
Funk.
Dear Mr. Funk, yes. Any case, he was a case. I don't know what to say about him. He stole my cell phone. I'll just start out from that. And he was definitely highly affiliated with the Meher Baba group because I saw him in India back in the 90s. It was 96 or 7,
Mm-hmm.
one of my last 2 visits.
Yeah.
And
What a small world, you know?
yeah, there's only 7 billion people, and I just happened to see him on the other side of the world, and then he
Yes.
registers for this class on this side of the world. Does that fit in with, you know, being part of that 600 that are ready to give their all, whatever, and, you know, whatever they
The
can
600
give?
was a prediction of Nadine's
Peter Nordine, yeah.
Yeah,
It was a
that-
threat, and not well, it was both.
that he felt comfortable by a certain time they would be 600 members from a growth from like say 200 to 600.
He said he was implying that they would be affiliated with the group, but that I
Okay.
would not be able to, they wouldn't necessarily attend meetings, but they would be friends of his family and friends of other people and somehow connected to that group and would be causing me trouble.
And so this seems the Funk character seemed to fit into this
Fits like a glove, yeah.
Nordine prophecy.
I don't know. I'm trying to think of a good comeback there. And, the Nordine baloney is what I'm thinking.
That sounds about right, though.
He was the worst statement with the worst student with cult behavior to date, and his affiliation is solidly based. And so that conclusion of his affiliation with the group is unassailable. And he asked if I knew him or whatever, and first in class, and that must have been the first or second day. And no, I didn't know him. But as soon as he asked the question, a part of my brain started working on it. I figured it out that evening, you know, as I was falling asleep. And oh yeah, that is the guy. That's the guy. Looks just like him, acts just like him, whatever.
And then
Manners.
he asked if you
Same
knew him.
body.
So there's the
Yeah.
total connection.
And he looked very happy when I didn't immediately say, yes, I remember you from the cult I used to belong to. And I made a point of never mentioning the cult directly when I was a teacher. So, and that was one reason not to respond. Okay, well, I think there's more of him later on here. Yes.
Now, is this
okay.
the one that stole your phone?
Yeah, so
Okay.
here's the story about the phone.
The phone, yes, issue.
My recollections of the cell phone are this, that at the end of the class, Larry had, first of all, he set himself unusually over towards the right of the classroom, okay? He's at the right. The other 3 or 4 students, very personalized instruction sometimes, but sometimes we had 18 students, whatever. But anyway, one guy's over here to the right, and that's Larry Funk, and then 3 or 4 other people, and the rest of the people in the class are over here on the left. And at the end of the class period, you know, people turn their homework in. So they come up and they turn their homework in. Larry gets up at the end of the class. He stands up immediately, and then he just sort of hems and haws, and he's sort of looking over to see what the other crowd is doing. And he could have easily been the first one to hand his papers in and be gone, but he slowed himself down. I didn't think much of it. It didn't change my behavior much. Just in retrospect, it meant something. So he comes up there. At the beginning of the class, I had set my cell phone down on the right-hand side. I clearly remembered it. There is absolutely no doubt in my mind whatsoever that this happened. I put my cell phone on the right-hand side of the table in front of me.
That was your custom.
Well, and many times it was. Sometimes I put it in my back pocket, but oftentimes it would be there on the right of the table. And yeah, so it was often there and available. So these other 3 or 4 students, they come up and they ask some questions and they have some chatting and whatever. And so my focus is on these 3 or 4 to my left-hand side, and I got a table right in front of me. You know, I'm at the front of the classroom, so Larry Funk comes by and he sort of hovers for a while, and then he doesn't say anything, doesn't ask me any questions, and he just puts his homework there, and then he shuffles out of the class quite rapidly, actually. And I noticed that too, but I didn't put it together. After the other 3 or 4 had left, of course, I noticed my cell phone was missing. And because it was on the right-hand side of the table, that's where Larry was, because I wasn't looking at him, because I was distracted by others, I concluded, quite truly it turns out, that he had stolen my cell phone. It couldn't have been anybody else. It really couldn't have been. They didn't make any lunges across the table to the other side where my phone was. Well, yeah. About a month or so, probably 6 weeks later, or something like that, he saw me on the outside of the building, the Elm building at AB Tech.
Now, wait a minute, before you go into that,
Yeah.
I remember we discussed this before, and you mentioned how that you was relaying this information to other people in the...
Oh, yeah. I told other people that I'd come to this conclusion. There were salespeople at the mall. There were friends. There were teachers that I'd worked with. So I told plenty of other people that this guy stole my cell phone. Obviously, I had to get a new one. I didn't want to be without one for more than a day or two. And so I had to buy a new one.
So then, about a month later...
6 weeks or more later, yeah. I think it was more than a month, but about a month. I saw him in the Elm building going inside, and he chatted me up and said, you know, I think your cell phone was found. It's like in the Lost and Found somewhere. I just sort of smirked and looked at him like, who's he trying to kid, you know?
Yeah.
And but I knew that I would get a direct lie if I ever confronted him with it. So anyway, I didn't ever say, you stole my cell phone, because then he'd go with it and he'd go through the denial, and that's the passive-aggressive thing. They lie, and then it's just typical.
But the very fact that he was...
well, yeah, then he's helping me out, being a friend, and, I happened to see it in the Lost and Found, and then it turns out, and you might look up in Kevin, I can't remember his name, Frank Maselli's office. That's my boss at AB Tech.
Right.
And where I think he's got a little Lost and Found there. And so I told Frank about it then as I walked in and found it, and here it is. The remarkable thing is, my phone was all charged up. And,
now that's, you wouldn't expect it.
You would not at all. In fact, I tested it out later on that phone. How long would it keep a charge? My charger was not stolen with it.
Right.
How long would it keep a charge? And it was about 1 week, just sitting on my desk, and when I'm not
No use.
No use, because I was using the other phone. I
Right.
had already been switched over to
Right.
it.
Right.
And he didn't use the cell phone, and he couldn't after about the first day or two when I got the new one. So,
So
where are we
evidently,
on this?
all of these people that you were bringing in and discussing the theft,
Yeah,
and that you felt very strongly that it was this Funk character,
yeah. Oh, felt strongly. I knew it with certainty.
Well, yeah, okay. Uh, but anyway, it could have got back to him that you felt real strongly that it was him
That did it.
that did it.
And he just happened to see it in the lost and found. And he
And the
didn't.
battery was charged up.
Yes. And that was odd because back then every cell phone manufacturer had sometimes 2 or 3 different methods
Oh,
of
gosh,
charging
yes,
and
it was
connectors on them, you know.
a nightmare of
It's-
charging
it's-
apparatuses, yeah.
It's not the standard micro USB connector, which works well for almost all phones these days.
Nowadays, yeah.
And saves people money. You had to buy this charger, you know, there's an extra 20 or 30 on something that costs
And then if you wanted a
$3.
car charger, there's another.
There's another, yeah. So anyway, I don't know. I think he was stealing information. He wanted to know who I had phone conversations with, and he probably got all the phone numbers, all the people's names, and all that stuff.
And this is the guy that you had
I've seen
in India, yeah.
And
So all this, everything now is really pointing to this,
yeah,
to these conclusions. You
it's-
felt more
the whole
justified.
incident is so black and white at this. So that's Larry Funk in a nutshell. He also
Larry Funk.
was a jerk. He did the usual passive aggressive things, you know.
Yeah, but so many of us are jerks, you know. You can't hold that against everybody. I know. I've been accused of being a jerk once or twice. Totally, you know. To me, I felt like I was, you know, doing acceptable behavior.
Yeah,
But,
you're just a beginner, Bruce.
oh, I
It's
see.
just
So who's our
Let's
next?
see.
Is that
Well,
draw to a conclusion, or are we
that's
still?
almost. Let me first talk about Justin Platts because he asked one day, comment about the day being special, and it happened to be January 31st, which is Amirtithi, the celebration of Major Boo Boo dropping his body and now belonging to the whole world. Blah blah blah. God realized. I don't know. Lots of phrases were used. And he
So he asked
he
this
thought it was
question.
special.
Yeah, and
And-
wondered how you're.
and he asked a question too of like, did I, what did I think was there anything special to me about this day or anything, you know? And I said, no. and it's just another day, you know, and I'm thinking, well, where was this going to and what was he getting at? And he's just sort of like disappointed that I didn't have my opportunity to
go on and on about.
to go on and on,
Yeah.
and I made a point of never talking about the cult involvement
So
as a teacher.
whenever he asked that question, at that time, was you related to this being the end of on this plane of existence of Mihar Baba?
No, he didn't mention anything
No,
like
I'm
that.
saying, did you realize that when he asked you the question?
Oh, did I think of the Amirtithi holiday?
Yeah.
That was on this day? Yes, immediately.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
But you had the
Oh,
composure to.
oh, sure.
This,
It didn't upset me. I mean, I'd seen students like this before.
but that's what really, that was the red flag there.
That definitely tied them in to the group, in my
Yeah.
opinion. There were other students, and some of them were identified. There were so many different things that would identify them. There was a connectedness to some who had that major boo-boo, the style of operations of the worst of the Meher Baba crowd. There were plenty of people in the Meher Baba group who were decent people. Unfortunately, they could not see through, and they didn't have the wisdom to see that well, this is a danger. Neither did I. It took a lot of lead poisoning and drugging, in my case,
in many years.
and many years to finally say, wait a minute, this is not what I want to be doing for the rest of my life, you know? This is like ridiculous. And they didn't have that experience necessarily. Only certain chosen ones or certain ones who didn't have enough friends in the group to... I might have actually had direct enemies in the group. My father But I mentioned this before. My father mentioned one time he might have some enemies, and he hoped that they didn't come after me. And this might have been the crowd that he hoped would not come after me, but they did.
So that kind of brings a draw to the your experiences at AB Tech. So
Yeah.
we'll go on to the next subject.
Okay.
So you've been teaching for quite a while,
Yeah.
AB Tech, Blue Ridge College here in Hendersonville, and so now you're moving on into a different phase, going into construction,
Mm-hmm.
and some from different parts of the country. You wouldn't all here just in the Asheville area.
Definitely not. Yeah. Well, yeah. So we did have different job sites. One happened to be in Asheville. That was a job that I was supervising mostly. They had some guy helping me out on occasion. When some of the big stuff was done, I would get some help from them. But most of the daily work I supervised, and that's what I was doing, and they didn't have to pay me travel time because I was so close to Asheville. It was a DaVita dialysis clinic, and that required a lot of electrical, a lot of plumbing, and a lot of drywall. And so we would get to know each other because all of those subcontracting categories worked for the general contractor who oversaw the job and made sure it went well. The type of people that I was working with were different than what I'd run into. I would do residential construction, that's what I'd done mostly, and some industrial work. And so commercial was a little bit new, so I was trying to learn the ropes from some of these people. And I was working with Chad Allen and Brandon Hollowell in Florence, South Carolina, and I was learning the type of construction and how they did business and what their style was. And one very good worker had 2 felony counts against him, but he said he did not, and it was not murder. And he said he did not want a third one. He just didn't want to be a 3-time loser and end up in jail. Because apparently he had been there and knew what it was about and didn't like it. And so I had respect for him. He did decent work, and as far as I was concerned, he was just like unto a good old boy. So anyway, that was in Florence, South Carolina. The next place I worked there was in Asheville, North Carolina. And like I said, when I worked in Asheville, I was running the job for 80 to 90% of the time, and sometimes for 2 or 3 days, Chad Allen and Brandon Hollowell or others from that crew would be there helping me, but only for the big jobs. Like when we had to do an outside run from the other side of the building and get into somebody else's electrical panel to take the power from there and run it to our panels independently and independently breaker them in our half of the building. So there was a lot of stuff and a lot of, you had to finish a job like that soon or people would get irritated. If we were in their face for more than an afternoon, that was too much from our point of view as well as the general contractor's point of view. Anyway, so here we are, and we're in Asheville, and that's what I did in Asheville. And at the Asheville site, Jeremy, the drywall subcontractor, and there was always a little bit of tension between us, and there was always this feeling like he was going to prove that he was head honcho over everybody, you know. He did it with everybody. It wasn't just with me, but he spent more time on me because I guess he just thought I was a nice guy, and he wanted to toughen me up a little bit or something. I don't know.
Oh, how generous.
How nice of him.
Yes, indeed.
Yes. Anyway, and also I didn't want to have, I've not been a big drinker in my life since I was back in college, you know. And so I didn't want to get involved in going out and having drinks.
All the social side
I
of
didn't want
the
all the social
equation,
side, yeah.
yes.
So there I was as the electrical subcontractor. The general subcontractor's man was not there on the job site. So there was nobody looking after the store, so to speak. Jeremy was there. He was a drywall guy, and he wasn't terribly busy that day. And apparently a friend of his, he introduced him as a friend. He just recently had become a friend, and according to what he said. And so they were carrying on this conversation about 10 or 20 feet away. And, okay. So, I didn't know, I thought at first he was like a specialized subcontractor, but he wasn't doing anything except talking to me and talking to Jeremy. And Jeremy wasn't doing anything, but he thought he was the boss of his group, so he didn't have to do anything. Actually, he did do work, but he was not doing anything that afternoon. He was there with his friend. They were chatting, trying to start up a conversation with me. And, okay. So Jeremy's friend said that a good friend of his knew me, okay? So this friend who wasn't really, Jeremy, who I worked with, had a friend who also had a friend who said he knew me. And they started talking about him for quite a while. He said he would not speak out the name, but told me that I would know for certain who they were talking about, okay? So, of course, Peter Nordin came to mind, and yet I cannot know for certain, just like they said. So, you know, I couldn't say in a court of law and blah, 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 that they were they knew something. I could only tell that to a detective looking into the case, and I'd certainly look them up, you know. The talking continued, and he said that he personally would become very upset if his friend ever came to any harm because of me, okay?
Well, they had to stand out.
That stood out, yeah. And it's like, who could I harm? Well, I could harm a whole lot of people in the Major Boo Boo group if I started telling the truth. I had not been publicly telling my story because I knew that there were some major threats against me, already outstanding, one by Peter Nordin especially. And so, as well as about 2 or 3 others in the group before I had even left the group. So, yeah, it stood out. So the talking continued, and he said that he personally would become very upset if ever. This was clearly a threat, and I said so. He said that to take it however I wanted to, but he would be very unhappy if any harm ever came to his friend because of me. Now, that was pretty much a repetition of what he first said. He said it in a very calm voice, just like he said the first time. He seemed, in a construction worker sort of way, you knew that he meant business. And he wasn't trying to be aggressive and threatening, but he was being threatening. And in that sense, anybody who makes a threat, you know, he's got to be seen as aggressive too. If I had to guess, I would say that Jeremy's friend lived in Asheville, an Arden area, and that's where Peter Nordin lived. And so there were reasons why I came to believe it was Peter Nordin. Peter Nordin's also mentioned probably over 200 times in all these writings of mine. And he was a key element in handling me at certain critical junctures when I was still quite lead poisoned. So,
And actually,
and I had something on him in the sense that I had something on everybody in that group. They were trying to protect the lead poisoners for all that I could see. You were saying something?
I was interrupting you there, but I was going to ask about a point that you made
Okay.
with the following description there. But basically, Peter, the Nordin was really the only guy that fit this bill that he was describing. There wasn't anybody else.
Yeah, it made no sense in any other city.
And it didn't make no sense that this would be a topic of conversation in any way. Why would he be offering to protect somebody that remains unnamed, you know?
Right.
And
I didn't know
offer
his
some-
friend's name, and I knew Jeremy wasn't going to tell me his friend's name. He basically said all of this. I mean, and that's just...
Make sure I understood properly. Jeremy knew this guy, and his associate knew the same guy, Peter Nordin.
Well, I think Jeremy had actually probably talked to this friend of his friend who didn't want to be damaged in any way by me. Okay? And I think it was, and in fact, they said things all out of order, all out of context. You know, it's just, didn't put this together until later. It could easily be construed that if I was making a tape recording, a jury would have a tough time with it, you know. I didn't have a tape recorder. I don't do that stuff. Rare occasions have I done that. So he was like,
It's so much out of the blue.
it was just out of the blue, yeah. And there was a connection, and they were making a threat. And
It sounds really like one of the strongest cases that you could make back to the cult from individuals that you're describing in the aftermath of your association.
I thought it was pretty strong, yes, but it didn't feel strong at the time because of this out of sequencing they did, you know.
Right.
They said, oh yeah, well, yeah, I've gone to lunch with this fellow, but only a couple of times or something, like he was a new friend, you know, and he didn't have a lot of friends in Asheville. Jeremy didn't. He lived down in 2 or 3 hours away, near Rockingham or somewhere around there. And his friend was a new friend, apparently. There was a little bit of hinting of that in the nature of the conversation. But his friend the friend of Jeremy's lived in Asheville. The friend of Jeremy's, who was not named and they explicitly stated they would not name him, might have come from Asheville, since the friend of Jeremy came from Asheville. I mean, you know, it wouldn't take long for a detective to figure out that there was something going on here, and he'd better listen, and I'd better come up with all the stuff as a witness, you know, that I could say to put the three of them together. And so I have. There was something funny, and it was fishy, and yeah.
So this kind of your experience in the construction, you had these instances that come up, and probably some more when you were at Fort Bragg.
Yeah.
Was
yeah,
this the
some
same?
more. No, no, the
Is this
same.
a different character or different?
I don't believe Jeremy ever showed up in Fort Bragg, not while I was in Fort Bragg. He might have been on the job later on, I don't know. But
But you did have another experience.
I did have another experience with the contractor. And I had that experience, well, first of all, I had been in Florence, South Carolina. Then I went to Asheville for a couple of months. The job got finished. And in fact, I had reasonably good marks on it from people, even though I had a lot of difficulty with another person I'd like to include in this group, but he just didn't have, you know, he didn't rise to that level of real, it wasn't the red flag level, you know, not really. So there's other job sites, and one of the other job sites that I went to was Fort Bragg. And I could talk about Travis Lowry before that, because he seemed to be quite connected with Jason, who was on the Fort Bragg job site. Okay,
But they both, you never had contact with them both together?
No, I don't believe I did. Well, maybe I did at Reedsville. That was a different site, just
Right.
for a few days, where I saw Travis Lowry and Jason being buddy-buddy with one another. And I had a bad experience with Travis Lowry on the Asheville job site. Did I mention that earlier? It might
No,
be in-
it's the
okay.
first time he's come up.
Okay. He insisted on calling the shots, and he would just stop or slow down the work. We had 2 conduit runs. We had to start out from the panel. Once you get them started, you know, you get 3 or 4 people with ladders, and you just work your way along, and it goes pretty fast. And that would be a couple of days later, you know, after we started it out at both ends. We'd get somebody else to come in, and they'd help us all, and we'd get it done real quick. And you had to get some things done quickly because it impinged on other people's activities in the building who were still
Yeah,
occupying the building.
especially your drywall.
Yeah, well, anyway, let's not talk about them. So Travis was at Asheville, the Asheville site, for a day or 2. And, but he insisted on calling the shots, said it got to go this way. I had a big problem. I could see it colliding in my mind's eye, that there was going to be a big thing, and we'd probably have to bend out of shape some of the drywall construction that Jeremy was doing. And I knew there'd be no end to that conversation, you know. He'd make a point out, well, you're tearing up my wall all the time here with your pipes, can't you aim right, you know? And I'm thinking I could weakly blame, you know, Travis Lowry on it. Shoot, Travis Lowry's 5 times the electrical construction guy you are. And, you know, there'd be all this crap going back and forth. And so I just wanted to avoid that stuff.
Sure.
And so anyway, I'd like to have gotten rid of Travis, but you can't. I couldn't, because he had driven 2 hours with another worker, and his other worker was no problem. So,
And there was probably equipment and stuff
yeah,
on his truck.
exactly. A lot of equipment, and specialized equipment. The hole punches, you know, costs a couple of $100 for a set of them. They go up to 4 inches in size, you know. And we had a 3-incher and a 2-incher to do on that particular day. And so I needed that stuff, and I needed the help, because you had to have some sort of coordination. But somebody had to be the boss, and I had to be the boss. I was the boss, right, in name, but it took me a couple of hours to figure out that I can't get rid of the guy real easily, and I'm sort of stuck with him. Let's just try to work with him and say, no, I'm not doing it that way. I'm going to do it this way. I had to be more bullheaded about it than he was. So I can't say for certain that Travis Lowry was connected with the cult from this incident, and I can't even say that I believed he was from this one incident. But my real reason for saying he was cult affiliated was the close connection between Travis Lowry and Jason. So I got to bring in Jason. And I saw Travis Lowry and Jason, I believe it was at Reedsville, for a day or two at one other occasion. And location, and they were getting along real well, and I'd heard from people that Travis was a problem, and that this other guy was getting along real well with them, and I might have a problem with both of them, you know, and because they knew something about this cult thing, whether they admitted it or not. I don't remember what level of conversation I had with all of them about it, but I did trust other people in this, who I did construction work with some of my personal stuff. I didn't mind at all. But with some people, they just take the ball and run when they have that. So let's go over and visit with Jason. And I didn't like his company, basically. I had made a decision pretty early I wanted to stay away from him. I just didn't feel good. There were physical things that occurred in congruence with his presence, okay? So one of the things that was very noticeable was with this other event that I want to mention. And there was this one event where we were all, 3 of us, Tim Cashwell, a guy who knew about heavy equipment real well, and Jason, who also seemed to be pretty decent at driving heavy equipment, and myself, who I never even tried to drive heavy equipment. You know, I had a different function. I had a certificate that said that I was the kind of person that the company had to have on a military government job, okay? I had the certificate, and I was relatively inexpensive, because they could, if they hired somebody out to do this, it probably had been $40 or $50 an hour or more. And I certainly wasn't getting that kind of scale at all. So anyway, Tim Cashwell was there at the apartment. Jason was there at the apartment. I was there at the apartment, and we were all watching TV. And we were sitting on couches around and looking at the TV set. And then all of a sudden, after a pretty long silence, and I'm not sure what was on the TV set or what was being said, he said, though, if someone did something like that to me, I'd poison him. And I thought that was pretty strong language and pretty much surprising, you know, like, I don't believe the show had anything to do with poisoning. Why would he say that? And it was sort of scary, you know. So where was he coming from and all that sort of stuff. I wouldn't let him get away with it, he said. At first I wasn't sure if it was said in response to Tim or the television we were walking. I might have dozed off very briefly, you know, sort of was going, I'm just tired resting, you know. But I'd heard nothing except Jason's comment out of the blue, and it was strange. I didn't feel like it was something I wanted to directly comment about, so I didn't say anything to anybody at that time. But later on, I talked to friends about it. I really did not know, okay, I had noticed Travis Lowry and Jason working in Reedsville, so I connected Travis Lowry up with this whole thing. But I thought that was supporting evidence because they were known to be tight with one another. This guy, Travis, this guy, Jason, had just made this comment about poisoning somebody as a revenge thing. And, okay. So I played back the memory, and yeah, Tim was gone. Tim left, actually. He maybe went to warm his car up or do something. He was sitting in his car, maybe. I decided to leave, and last of all, Jason decided to leave. I don't know. I didn't know how that was going to come out. It was a very strange occurrence. But there's one other incident that speaks to where Jason was coming from. And so I'm going to describe this in detail. I definitely remember it. It was about a flat tire I had. So pretty short time before I left Bragg for the last time and quit my employment for the last time, my car had a flat tire in the parking lot where we worked at Fort Bragg. I made the mistake of mentioning it to the crew, and Jason volunteered to help. But I pretty much had to mention where I was going because we were just slack and doing nothing at that time. And you couldn't do that for long without, you know, the general contractor's man having his say about it. So anyway, I insisted that I didn't need help, but Jason volunteered, but I insisted I didn't need help, but he hung around anyway. So, oh no, I'll help you. And that's like, oh, please, you know, but I didn't say anything. So we got to the car and took out the jack and the spare wheel and the lug nut wrench. At some point when the jack was just laying on the ground, Jason picked it up and he picked up the lug nut wrench and he started to undo the lug nuts. And he kept slipping. He did not have the socket far enough down on the lug nut. Additionally, he kept putting a bad twist and torque at the wrong angle. The result was that the socket and the lug nuts were taking a beating. I groaned to myself the only way I could reconcile the previously good mechanical sense that everybody had concluded was a part of Jason's being. Jason was demonstrating nonsense when he was supposed to have good sense, you know. So what I was witnessing, he was intentionally trying to screw up the lug nuts or the wrench or both. And so I had to step in, and I thought, oh, geez, you know, I'm going to be stuck here if he succeeds in where he seems to be going with all of this. So I took the lug nut wrench and did the job right with no slippage. None whatsoever. You don't need to slip, you know.
No.
Fortunately, damage was minimal at this point. But, you know, Jason would be there, and he's sort of positioning his finger. He had a gauge as to how far he could put it on and make it slip if he did a little angle thing to it, you know. Applied torque at the wrong direction, and it would all go all foobar. I won't say what that means. So I took the socket wrench, the lug nut socket wrench from him, and did the job right. It was minimal at that point. Had I allowed Jason to go ahead, he might have damaged something, and my car would have been trashed and dead in the water at that point.
But it's obvious that a good job wasn't his intent.
Right, and a good job was his hallmark whenever he was doing work in front of the other people on the job site, particularly Travis. Do you want to do your intro?
Yeah, so all of this is basically a brief revelation of your experiences with the Meher Baba outfit.
Meher Baba.
Yes, and I'm known for, you know, crippling the right language, but anyway, it's you've got a conclusion here that I feel is very well done. I'd like to hear that.
Okay, this is the last page and a half, page and 2/3, whatever, from this second major writing that I've done, and so I'll say.
But if somebody that's considering this, and they're on the internet, and they are searching, trying to determine what they might want to do. If just one person heard this and kept them out of this, it would be
Yeah.
worth it.
I think it'd be a good thing, yeah.
Yes, I do too.
So many will dispute what I conclude, but remember that I do have a unique perspective on the whole series of events. I will ask all who read this to read both complete stories, that is the ones that I've written, or to listen to an audio track that I hope will be forthcoming within a couple of days after the video. Before dismissing what I have to say, I was there when Peter Nordin made threats, when he waited less than a single second, then walked out before an appropriate response could possibly be made. When he showed extreme fear at what I might do in response to his speech and actions. When he showed fear over my staying power. When he showed fear over my continuity of existence, and countless other critical moments with him. I was there when Eric Nadel informed me that he and others had made a tour of India in the early 1970s. I wasn't there on the tour, but I was there when he talked about being on that tour, and he found ashrams in India that had a problem with various factions lead poisoning one another. I was there when Eric Nadel expressed fear that I might try to go against him sometime. I was there when he expressed fear when I was merely competent. And apparently they had told somebody something different. And, I was ruffling his feathers somehow, and I wasn't being compliant, wasn't being nice, whatever. I was there when Alan Wagner used those dirty acupuncture needles on me. And I say dirty because there's a part of me that takes real the possibility that I could have been lead poisoned by an actual resident from Meher Baba land. And I don't have a lot of evidence, but he was talking pretty nasty, and he said that the needles were bad, and I felt bad immediately afterwards. I felt bad while the needles were in me. It wasn't good, not at all. So I was there, and I was pretty warped out of shape. I was there when the water containers at the Pilgrim Center in India were not dumped. If you have looked at the previous videos, you might remember that too. And I was there feeling bad for weeks after that incident, at first wondering what was making me feel so bad, and then wondering if the hell would ever end. I was there when a friend showed up with the serious facial injuries because a person who was highly affiliated with the Meher Baba cult, in my opinion, talked her into an endangering situation. Regretfully, I had to say goodbye. I don't know that you could understand. It was not easy to come to the realization that they had the power to reach into my life and do that much damage to me. I was there contra dancing when people, always from the same crowd, broke up the contra dance line just before arriving where I was at. I felt good at contra dancing. I was getting better and better in it, and I could have a smile on my face. But I was also there when people pushed me into the adjacent contra dance line. I was there when certain people repeatedly did the wrong moves when I was dancing with them, sometimes sending me off into the wrong direction. I was there when people yanked on my arms and danced the wrong moves. I was there for hundreds of these sorts of events over a period of many years. I was there when gangs of students or individuals enrolled in my classes and intentionally interrupted, maneuvered, disrupted, and made threats in my classroom. Regretfully, I had to say goodbye to teaching. All of these events mentioned above and in the previous My Life Inside the Meher Baba Cult happened to me. Events such as these did not occur to me before I became involved with the Meher Baba cult. To me, it's no accident. I'm not just calling it that way to insult them. It really is a cult. To me, the interlocking circumstantial evidence becomes very strong and points to the fact that the Meher Baba group was and is a cult. I left the cult, but they would not leave me. All would be well advised to stay away from the cult I was involved with, as well as other cults, and to protect their loved ones. I wish the best of luck to those who still remain in the group. Some of them might actually be watching this. I found it extremely difficult to leave. I had friends inside it. I was giving up my life, basically, my way of living. To those inside the group who believe that the group is able to fix the problems themselves, I urge caution. Many people highly placed in the group were well aware of the problems and did nothing. A sense of denial and an attitude of silence naturally prevails. Good luck. In the section of My Life in the Meher Baba cult, The Glass, Phil Assad was gone after by a group of people, courageous people, from within the cult. Their efforts were squelched by higher-ups in the Meher Baba organization. Who were those higher-ups? Peter Nordin seemed to know, but never let me in on who he thought was involved in stopping the prosecution. He merely commented that I would be surprised at who was responsible. So I could guess. Gee, was it Minu? Was it the residents? Was it the Mandali, those holy people we were taught in the cult, who lived over in India with Meher Baba all of his life? Was it Meher Baba himself? Was it those who were so highly respected in the Meher Baba group? The danger of this group runs much deeper than a single person being done wrong. The danger lies in the sense of truly blind loyalty instilled in its members. This is reminiscent of good Germans looking the other way when millions were slaughtered in World War II Germany. The danger lies in endorsing the means as justifying the ends. The danger lies in the tacit endorsement of the methods used to provide spiritual progress to those who were seeking it. The danger lies in endorsing and in being a part of a cult that has so many well-hidden flaws that it can never, ever be a long-term benefit to its members. So I'm here exposing those well-hidden flaws, I suppose. At least I think of myself that way. The group has, for the past 48 years or more, had as part of its fundamental basis the harboring of lead poisoning criminals and the victimization of innocent people. This is not a sound basis for future growth, not at all. Please consider what I have written and be careful. Okay?
Okay, Bob, we appreciate you sharing this with us.
Yeah.
And I'll make every effort to edit this thing and make it what you wanted the outcome to look like.
Okay, thank
And
you.
you got some more plans to make the audio tapes?
I do. I got to get busy on them, yeah.
Okay, well, that will say I do.
What?
Goodbye.
Goodbye. Yeah. That will say